Jim Collison, we're live from the Heartland Developer Conference 2017 here with Dustin Clonch. And welcome back, Dustin. Great to have you back. We've had you once before, but you're here. Well, before we dive in, let's tell who you are, who you work for, what you do, those kinds of things, just so folks get to know you.
Sure. So my name is Dustin Clonch. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Agilix Software. We're a software development company in the Haymarket in Lincoln. Founded in 2011. My business partner, Jake McElroy, he was here with me last time. So we're a custom development shop, and we write software for companies, everything from your startup that's got a little bit of funding that wants a mobile app or a web app, all the way to billion-dollar publicly traded companies, some of them located here in Omaha. And some on the coast. We do write some companies for some software for some companies on the coast as well. Really over the last 6 years, we just kind of developed into this kind of one-stop shop. Companies have software needs. They'll come to us, spec it out, we'll quote it out and build it, and then try to build a long-term partnership with those companies where we're kind of their software arm. And for a big company, that can be really attractive to kind of, I don't have to hire developers. I don't have to hire project managers. I don't have to take on this huge amount of technical debt. I can just go to a company like Agilix, and every time I want a piece of software written, they'll write it for me. They'll work with, a lot of our bigger clients have they have quality assurance people, they have project managers, they have product owners, if you will, but they don't want to invest in the development side of it because that's expensive, right? And when you take a general manager and try to fold them into run a software department or a development department in a big company, that's kind of a recipe for disaster most of the time. So that's usually our advice is if you're thinking about hiring in-house developers, don't. Right? Because most people think, and we have a lot of customers that think this is, well, I've got this, I want this piece of software for my company. And whether it's a little company or a big company, I'm just going to go hire a developer, right? And I'll just tell this developer what I want and he'll write it for me. But what most people don't realize is the actual fingers of the keyboard programming is about 10% of creating software, right? You've got requirements gathering, project management, customer expectations, support, maintenance, architecture planning, all this stuff that developers don't do. Developers like to code. Yeah. They like to solve problems. That you give them a problem and then they write code to solve it. So there's this whole other kind of thing behind the curtain, that nobody sees. And at Agilix, that's really what we've tried to kind of normalize and create processes behind. So that when a customer comes to us, we have a discovery process we go through that's kind of a proprietary thing that we've created, kind of to go from that 30,000-foot view down to that 10-foot view of, okay, you know the problem, right? You know the problem you're trying to solve, but you have no idea how to solve it, how long it takes, how much it's going to cost, what that looks like 5 years down the road after you've created this piece of software. And one of the most dangerous things that you can do in software development is have developers working in a vacuum. So, developers, we're empire builders. I have 20 years in development experience, and I can tell you I'll be the first to admit that we're empire builders. Like, I wrote this, don't touch it. You don't have to understand it. And as long as you keep me around, you're safe. And we try to kind of flip that around and say, we don't want to be empire builders. We want to write you a piece of software that if 2 years down the road, you decide, hey, we're going to hire in-house developers or we're going to go with a different company, you can take that code base and give it to any competent development shop. And they're going to be able to look at that and go, these guys did it right. I can work with this, and try to break those walls down a little bit. Yeah.
And you guys are a .NET shop?
Primarily .NET on the back end. We do a lot of Angular, JavaScript on the front end. We do a lot of mobile apps too, native iOS and Android apps. So it's kind of a split. But all of our guys are like our CTO Jeff. He's got 15 plus years experience doing .NET development. I started out on the PHP MySQL side, but then got into .NET development about halfway through my career. So we tend to hire .NET developers. Yeah.
I remember the day when Microsoft came up with this idea of .NET and threw it out there, and it seemed like it took a long time for that traction to kick in. Java was real popular for a while. But in the last 3 or 4 years, man, .NET has made a run. And we're just, we can't seem to hire enough of them. We have a lot of companies do that. Why do you think that there's just been this surge in .NET popularity? And what's Microsoft doing that's leading that? Because it just seems like it's growing and growing fast.
Sure. Yeah, I think the change of guard at Microsoft was really big. I think when Ballmer left and Nadella came in, he came from Sun Microsystems, and so he had kind of a foray into that Java open source kind of area. And I think that he's really sharp. We have a lot of respect for the guy, and I think that he's steered Microsoft in the right direction. So he basically said, if we're going to survive and we're going to have a viable development stack. We can't force developers to use Windows. We can't force developers and companies to host our apps on Windows. So I think that a lot of these detractors that basically, and we run into them all the time, and we're fully aware of the limitations of .NET. You know, a lot of times it can be slow, it can be hard to scale. You got the Microsoft tax where it's like, okay, well, I've got to spend $20,000 on SQL, I've got to spend, you know, $2,000 on Windows, I've got to buy all this hardware. And to get a .NET app to perform at the level of, like, let's say a Java or a Ruby or a PHP app, you had to dump a lot more money into the hardware and the infrastructure. And I think Nadella came in and he said, you know what, we've got to change all this. You know, we've got to open source, we've got to embrace open source, which Microsoft never did. We've got to embrace Linux, which Steve Ballmer wouldn't even let you say Linux at Microsoft. And so he came in and, you know, now they're releasing Microsoft SQL Server for Linux. And as a developer for the last 20 years, it was a big enough shock that they open sourced .NET. But the big shock was that they said, we're gonna release our flagship big money maker, which is SQL Server, and we're gonna release that on Linux, right? So no longer do you have to have this big expensive Windows server and maintain and do like a, you know, software assurance and all that stuff like that. You can just run it on a, you know, Ubuntu, on Cent, on any of those Linux flavors, and it's gonna run. It's gonna be enterprise grade. And they did it to compete with Oracle, right? Because Oracle was kind of eating their lunch because you can install Oracle on Linux and all kinds of other different platforms. So I think that contributes to it. And I think the fact that Microsoft embraced kind of the, you know, GitHubs of the world, they kind of said, you know, hey, we're not going to fight. You know, right now, Team Foundation Server is Microsoft's big source control kind of stack, right? And they came out with Team Foundation Server Online, and they have their own source control kind of stack. Well, now Microsoft, a couple of years ago, they started offering Git, which is a hugely popular version control and source control stack. They started defaulting now. When you spin up a new project in Visual Studio Online, it defaults to Git for the source control. So that right there just tells you how committed they are. And I think developers have started to see that, you know, and now with Core, developers are seeing I can build, you know, Core is by far the fastest web server-side framework out there now. I mean, it blows Node away. You know, there's a couple other like C-level, like processor level stuff that's a little bit faster. But as far as like kind of a managed framework, right? You know, Core is ridiculously fast, and we've done some performance analysis in-house, some tests, you know, between Core and .NET, the regular full .NET framework, and it's mind blowing. And for .NET developer, you see this, and it's like, you know, we're used to kind of watching things spin up a little bit slow, and kind of we're just used to it, and then you implement Core, and you're like, wow, instant. You know, everything's instant, everything's lightweight. So I think Microsoft has really steered the ship in the right direction, and, I think new leadership has really done that.
Certainly, with Core, there's some challenges of making some transitions from old to new. I'm assuming. What are some of those challenges? It's not just a flip of a switch, I would imagine.
No. I think probably the biggest challenge is the tooling. You know, Microsoft Visual Studio is, I'll argue all day long that Visual Studio is the best IDE, you know, integrated development environment in the world. I mean, it's the tooling. They've spent so much money on that, so much time on that. It's evolved, you know, since Visual Studio .NET came out in 2000 or 2001, and they've evolved it. So I think the tooling is a challenge because it's different. They've embraced more of an open source. You know, they use it like Grunt and Gulp and Node Package Manager and some other really geeky tools to do that. So I think that's one of the challenges. And I think the fact that most people don't realize that .NET Core is really a rewrite from the ground up. It looks and it smells like .NET, but when you look at what they did, it's really, they went back to the drawing board. And they said, yeah, we're going to make the namespaces the same and a lot of the nomenclature the same. But as far as the underpinnings, it's completely new. And they've made some breaking changes along the way. You know, even between .NET Core 1 and .NET Core 2, they've made very significant breaking changes. And so for developers, and as a CEO of a development company, I have to look at what's best for my customers. You know, my developers might be going, we want to use Core, you know, let's do this, let's embrace this. But, you know, for my, you know, billion-dollar company that I work for that expects our software to run right, expects us to be the professionals, we have to make sometimes those hard decisions to say, it's maybe not ready yet, you know? And so that's one of the challenges. I think Microsoft has really brought in the open source and the developer community to say, you know, hey, help us. If there's some part of the framework that we haven't yet, you know, converted from full .NET to Core, you know, it's open source, so you can go and contribute. And there's been several instances where on the roadmap, Microsoft has kind of said, well, we've got this feature set that, you know, it's going to be .NET Core 3. We're not going to be able to get to it. We just don't have the resources. And the open source community, the developer community, has actually stepped in and contributed to the project and written those things before Microsoft could ever do it on their own. So I think, there's just feature disparity. There's things like that. And it's bleeding edge. And typically your corporate client, which is our bulk of our clients are corporate clients, they're not necessarily comfortable with bleeding edge.
Sure.
Right? They want,
nor should they be in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah, it needs to work every time, right? It can't afford, they can't afford hiccups.
Well,
because even some small hiccups can, from a client base, could be a big impact. Right?
Absolutely. And they can't pay us to write an application, and then next year when the next version of the framework comes out, that breaks. They're going to come back to us and go, well, wait a minute, when we wrote this, you knew we wanted this to run for the next 50 years or 10 years or whatever it is. So it's really the onus is on us to say, yeah, it's great, it's fun, it's exciting, but kind of have to dial it back a little bit.
Is that some of the consideration that needs to go when you're thinking about of moving to this framework or not? Do you have to look back and kind of ask all those questions about customer base and where are we trying to go with this and how much risk do you want to take?
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll always lay out, we go through discovery with our clients where we, like I said before, and we'll always lay out, hey, here's your options. Here's the advantages, the disadvantages, like a SWOT analysis, if you will, that says, hey, this is what might happen. And we definitely have to kind of look at that on a per client basis. Some of our clients they're not risk averse. They're like, hey, that's great. I know maybe some things might break, but I want to be on that bleeding edge. I want to be on that forefront. Most of those are startups.
I was going to say, it's pretty easy. You probably find, or is it your advice if you're starting new, is core? Do you go core just from the very beginning, or are there circumstances that may
depends on the requirement?
Okay.
We in our talk today, Jeff outlined some things. Basically we had two projects that were production projects, and the first project was a greenfield, what we call greenfield project, right? No technical debt, no existing system. It's a brand new idea, brand new application. The first one we did went great. Core serviced all of our needs. It was wicked fast. We knew it was going to scale big, so that was one of the considerations. So we went through and developed that. The second application, there were a lot more integrations. It was a financial, like an auction kind of sales app. And we got about 3 weeks into it with Core. And as the requirements became more clear with the client, we just had to basically pull the plug and say, we're just going to go back to the full framework. It's just not going to work to do Core. And those are hard lessons to learn, especially when you're paying developers and project managers and trying to deliver for the client. But I feel if you're going to embrace that and you're going to be on the forefront, you have to make those investments early on.
Yeah, and I'm assuming Microsoft's goal with Core is to bring it up to be full featured, matching what exists today. How long do you think it'll take for that to get there? And is the community? Does it depend on how often the community contributes?
Yeah, I mean, I would give it 2 to 5 years. I know it's kind of an ambiguous answer, but it depends on the community. I think that .NET standard really helps because that .NET standard library is kind of like if you want to write an application today, and you can't necessarily use Core today because there's other integrations. You're waiting for the third-party community to catch up. The tooling, the libraries, the SDKs, you're waiting for them to catch up. Microsoft was really smart, and they said, well, we're going to create this .NET standard library. And basically, it's the lowest common denominator, really. So if you want to write your apps, write to the standard library, and then when Core catches up, your code's already going to run. And so you can just change your target framework to Core, and it's all going to run. It's all going to be fast. You can deploy it to Linux. You can deploy it to Mac OS, FreeBSD, whatever you want to deploy it to, right? And so I think Microsoft's really smart to do that. And they didn't do that in the beginning. .NET standard wasn't really on their roadmap. And I think that enough developers push back. I mean, make no mistake, Microsoft has made huge breaking changes from version 1 to version 1.1 to version 2 of .NET Core. And they did it unapologetically. They said, listen, guys, we're in this for the long haul. We're building a world-class replacement for .NET. We're not going to make sacrifices in quality and functionality just for brevity or for speed to get it out to market. And it's a big change for Microsoft. Because Microsoft, a lot of times, they would come out with products, especially with .NET updates, I mean, I can think .NET 2.0 and .NET 3.5 were some of the biggest incremental changes, and they broke a lot of stuff, and they made a lot of developers mad. I mean, I can remember I was in the bank software industry at the time, and you're talking about you want to get a call from a vice president of a bank or an IT director at a bank that says, hey, we just updated our servers, and now none of this, our customers can't use the ATMs, and our customers can't, and it's like, that they really made a lot of developers shy. And I think that they've stepped back, and I think a lot of that has to do with their leadership now.
Yeah, we have an engineer in charge. I think that
exactly
that tends to help. On the Windows side for Microsoft, they have a thriving insider community that they're actually listening to, which is another big change at Microsoft. On the .NET side, same. Do they have similar mechanisms? You mentioned they have community members contributing, but do they have an insider mechanism or a mechanism for them to get feedback in pretty easily?
They do. They have their insider program.
Okay.
And and once you kind of get into that fold and get in those communication channels, you're notified, hey, this is coming out next week, or this is coming out next month. Here's a community tech preview is what they do, the CTP they call it. And they've really made it accessible. So kind of prior to the new CEO coming on at Microsoft, there was such a cost associated with it. You had to be an MSDN subscriber, and MSDN is, for an enterprise,
$7,000 or $8,000.
Yeah. And if you wanted access, you had to pay. You had to pay to play. And now Microsoft has basically come out and said, hey, give us your email, sign up for this. You don't have to pay. You can get SQL Server on Linux early. You can, test that out. You can get early versions of Core. And I mean, Core was easy because it was open source. So if you wanted to be an early adopter or an early preview of Core, you just went to GitHub and checked out the latest, nightly builds and ran it. But I think with some of their, higher dollar products like SQL Server, they really kind of said, we're not doing any good by reducing the number of developers that get to touch this early. So if we're going to set up a paywall where you've got to work for a big organization, or you've got to be a startup or a student or something like that, well, how many developers are you excluding? And how many of those developers that you exclude could potentially contribute huge gains to the project? And I think they've just got it now. They're like, what, open it up. We're going to make the money either way, and the more developers that we can get to write the more apps for our platform, the more penetration that we're going to have, and that's good for everybody.
Yeah. No, it's good. So it's a whole different world. As a Windows insider, I'm watching some amazing openness to what's going on. They've been very transparent.
It's almost like a Doctor Who episode. I mean, you're just like, I can't believe some of this stuff is happening. It's like that doesn't make logical sense coming from Microsoft, but they're doing it, and and they're supporting the development community and supporting companies like ours.
Yeah. Last set of questions here. Visual Studio, you mentioned earlier. You're very high in Visual Studio. Is that something a beginner can step into? And are there ways to get started? I know Microsoft has Virtual Academy and some other things to help with that. But can a college student jump in there, learn Virtual Studio, and really get going in the .NET framework fairly easily? Or is it takes a little work?
It takes a little work. Microsoft, again, has made strides. So what they've done is they kind of had a bad approach to it. But basically, you had your full Visual Studio, right, which had all the bells and whistles. You had your Pro version, your Enterprise version, and then you had what they called the Express versions. The Express versions were so limited, you had to pick a language. So if you wanted to write in C#, you downloaded the Express C#. And you couldn't write in VB or F# or any of those other languages that Microsoft has. And what they've done, they realized that was just not going to, nobody liked that, right? And so what they did is they released basically the Community Edition, which is a full-featured. I mean, the only thing you get really with the Enterprise and the professional versions now is some telemetry, some advanced debugging and tracing tools, memory tools. But for a student or for anybody looking to get into it, Visual Studio can be very daunting, even at the Community Edition level. Luckily, they've done things like released Visual Studio Code, which is basically like a text editor, but it's got some IntelliSense, some debugging, some project templates. And then they've also released Visual Studio for Mac, which, I mean, I'm a Mac user. All of our programmers have Macs, even though they boot into Windows a lot of the times. And so Visual Studio for Mac allows you to download very lightweight. I mean, Visual Studio Professional, you're talking about 10 to 12 gigs of data on your hard drive, right? Just for that, even Community Edition. So Visual Studio for Mac, very lightweight. Visual Studio Code's very lightweight. It doesn't have kind of all the daunting, I get lost in this and that. So yeah, they've created kind of steps, that you can take. The Visual Studio still is one of those things where you've just got to put the 5,000 or the 10,000 hours in, figure the stuff out. I mean, we have some of the smartest guys I know working for us, and we probably use 10 to 20% of the capabilities of Visual Studio just because there's so much there. I mean, it's really a world class. I mean, even non-Microsoft developers look at Visual Studio and go, wow, I wish I had that for Ruby, or I wish I had that for PHP, because it does make it a lot easier.
Yeah, has it changed? Because Visual Studio didn't always seem to have the best reputation.
Yeah.
Is it changing, do you think?
It has. And historically, it's been very processor and memory intensive, very buggy. The builds could be buggy. The source control, Microsoft has a terrible track record of source control. I mean, all the way back to the source safe days, where your developer would leave for the weekend when you were supposed to publish, and he would have a file checked out and it's locked, so you can't publish. So they had a lot of criticism there. Them open sourcing a lot of their build tools, like the MS Build and the Roslyn compiler, that helped because it allowed people to come in and say, hey, here's a bug that you've had for years, and I can fix it for you, and I'm going to do a pull request and check it in. And they've included a lot of those. So it's gotten better. It's still a beast. I mean, if you want to do like a web, desktop, mobile, they bought Xamarin, so now you can do mobile development. It's still a beast, and there's still a huge learning curve, but it's just hands down, And I'm the first one to be a Microsoft critic because I've always been kind of an Apple guy, and I didn't start out in the Microsoft world, but I mean it's by far I'm a techie, so I use ReSharper, or not ReSharper, but the company that makes ReSharp, JetBrains, just came out with a C# IDE of their own. You've got Java, there's Eclipse and NetBeans and all these other tools that you can use, and I've used them all. Everything from Notepad all the way up to like advanced suites, and Visual Studio is just hands down the best.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just
it can be a chore to install.
Oh yeah,
that can be almost a job in itself. In fact, some of our new employees, I don't know about yours, some of our new employees spend the first couple of days installing Visual Studio, getting it up and running, and so it can be a challenge.
I mean, they've gotten better, but a lot of times you would install like ReSharper from JetBrains or some other kind of third-party utility or extension for Visual Studio, and it would literally just cripple Visual Studio. It would just not run. You'd start it up and it would just sit there and spin. And they've gotten better with that too. So yeah, but you're right though. I mean, it's even for our guys that come in and we've installed it a million times, you still run into stuff where you're like, I don't. Yeah, we
spent 2 weeks of our interns' time getting test scripts just around installing. So you knew what you were installing and when you were installing it, what was the right, like, okay, now you've got this, check this to make sure it's right. And so now we have a whole process document to walk them through, just because every environment's a little bit different. You probably run into that as well. All right, last question. When you think about the future, what are you excited about as you look forward in time, next couple years, and in this space of development? What are you excited about? What's coming up that kind of you can't wait for it to hit?
I think, again, the .NET Core thing is going to be huge. I think Microsoft buying Xamarin, because we have used Xamarin.
You would say that was a good call on their part?
Great call. Okay. Great call. One of the best investments they've made. We've used it all the way back when it was mono developed, right? And it was very buggy. I mean, you want to talk about like Mono Studio or what was it called? I can't remember what it was called before Xamarin bought it. But I mean, so we're excited for that. We're excited to be able to use .NET across you can write them for Mac now, for Android, for iOS, for Windows, for the web, everything like that. So we're excited to see where that goes. I think talent-wise, I think there's some people are doing some really cool initiatives to try to recruit talent. That's by far our biggest impediment in this industry, is hiring developers. And I think there's good sides and there's bad sides. There's some efforts that if you and I were in a different environment, you get a different answer from me. There's some efforts that I don't necessarily think the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Sure. But there are some people out there that are really identifying, hey, we've got this huge tech, and especially in the Midwest. We recruit from the Rakes School in UNL. Jeff's our CTO is a Rakes coach, so we recruit from that. And traditionally, Microsoft and Google have been standing outside the Rakes School, going, okay, you graduated, let's go to Redmond, or let's go to Palo Alto. And there's a talent vacuum in the Midwest. And so I think that companies like Gallup, companies like Nelnet, companies like, they're stepping up and saying, hey, it's in self-interest, but it also benefits the community, where it's like, hey, we need to get qualified, high-level developers into the market so these companies can thrive. Because it doesn't serve anybody to have all of our talent go to the coast.
Right.
And that's traditionally what has happened.
Yeah, we've picked up a ton. I'll have 50 high school kids on campus 3 Saturdays from now, and we'll teach them JavaScript. And
good start.
We got to start growing them, right? We instead of taking from the Rake School, we've started adding to the Rake School.
That's great.
So it's been really cool to have.
We do high school job shadowing, and then we have an apprenticeship program that we put kids right out of college, or even some that are in college, into this apprenticeship program. And then that can go from, we've had people do it in 6 weeks, and we've had people take 6 months. And then at the end of that, hopefully our goal is that they come on as a full-time developer. Right. And so it's kind of a farm league. Yep. It's served us really well. Yeah. It really has.
Yeah, no, it's been great. And it's tough. I've had some stolen by our friends at Google or Microsoft, and they're great kids, and you got to send them on their way. But at the end of the day, here in the Midwest, we've got to work really, really hard to keep some of those kids around, give some kids who didn't think they could do this, a shot at it. No, and they absolutely can. So great. Well, how's business in Lincoln?
It's great. We're up to our neck. I mean, we like I said, we can't hire developers and project managers fast enough. Our goal at Agilix is always, we never want to be the cheapest, and we never want to be the fastest, but we want to be the best. Yeah. And so we started to identify clients that, one of the things that we've learned over the last 6 years is not to say yes to everything. Yeah. And it's hard when you're first starting because you're keeping the lights on, right? Yeah. So you're like, oh, you got a check? That's a great idea. Right. And we've gotten to the point now in the last couple of years where we're just almost brutally transparent with people when they come in, because we do any client that comes into us, we do a discovery phase, and then we write a full statement of work, and then we do the actual development phase. And in that discovery phase, a lot of times it only takes a half hour. I had a guy come into me, and I'll keep it brief, but I had a guy come into me that he worked completely out of the tech space, and him and his wife had started building a house, or just got done building a house. And he sits down, and he brought his little baby in because the babysitter flaked out on him, and we're kid friendly, so we're like, yeah, that's great. Comes in, he starts telling us about his dream, him and his wife's dream. It's like, well, we have our life savings, and we're ready to put our life savings into something that, and we have this idea for a product. We just built a house, and man, coordinating between the builder and the subcontractors and the inspectors and us and everything was just a nightmare. And we have this great idea of, we're going to build this platform where everybody that's involved with building a home can have this central repository where I can upload things to get approval. And in our conference room, we have a TV and a wireless mouse. And as he's typing, I bring up Builder Trend. And I asked him, I go, have you done any market research on this? He's like, yeah, we've looked, and we just can't find anything out there. And I hit go, and it comes up with the website. And literally, the poor guy's face just melted. And he's just like, oh. And I'm like, come back to us again, But it's like many other companies would have just taken the kid's check and wrote the app and said, go swim with the sharks. And I don't know, it's for us as a service company, our only really important measure of success is whether our customer is happy and successful with the product. And so that's kind of a milestone or a litmus test that we use now is, when we're done here, are they going to be able to go out and sell this? Or are they going to be able to go out and use this? And if they're not, be honest, there's plenty of work. We have no problem. We've never done a single any sales. Everything's inbound. And so for us, it's like, there's plenty of other companies out there that need software development.
Yeah, right on. That's good to hear. Yeah, it's good to hear. Dustin, how do folks get in touch with you if they're interested in hearing more about Agilix? How do they get in touch with you?
Just go to our website, Agilix, agilx.com. My email address is on there. Our phone number's on there. Great. They can come visit us in the Haymarket. We are at 8th and P. Everybody knows where the Mill Coffee House is. We're on the 3rd floor, right above the mill. Stop in and see us.
Haymarket's a great place to be.
Oh, it's awesome. We resisted for a long time moving down there, and everybody tried to get us moved down there. Yeah. And then the old Fuse co-working space came open, and we know the founders really well. One's our CPA, and they said, hey, we haven't listed this yet. They haven't listed this yet. You guys should really look at it. And so we got with the building owner, and the rest is history. But our guys love it. I mean, coffee, lunch, everything. So
maybe the only other better place is on the riverfront in downtown Omaha.
Maybe.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, Dustin, thank you for taking the time. Hang tight for 1 second. If you're watching live, the videos, and a few of you are out there, next video is available right below this video. So if you just go down there in a few minutes, click play, we'll be there shortly. We'll be right back.